Hey, my babies. So, this morning, my witchy side and my nerdy side had a good little old time. And I now have a pretty invasive thought. And I now invite you to go down this rabbit hole with me. Just hear me out. Now, my thought was, what if channelers, people that can see and tap into the ether and see things beyond the veil, channelers, what if they are actually a superior species? Now, before we go off into the tiara, how dare you, this sounds really tone deaf to the oppression of people of color that is currently going on in the world. No, it is not, because while I am not ignorant to the things that are going on around me, if you follow where I'm going, you might just see the point. And also, racism is within the same species, okay? We're all Homo sapiens, right? So black, white, Asian, these are different races within a species. What I'm speaking about is coming from a more logical, scientific even standpoint, and speaking about an entirely new species. Just follow me here. So it is very common knowledge that the average human can only access 8 to 10% of their brains. Okay. Now, parapsychology is kind of like the study of supernatural events, right? If you're old enough, you remember the actual story of the Amityville horror movie and the couple that were, it was a husband and wife team of parapsychologists. So ghost hunters we would think of, because it is a known fact that thoughts give off measurable energy that can actually be measured by scientific instruments, okay? There are plenty of movies with parapsychology at work, even the original Ghostbusters. That is actually what they were before they started busting ghosts. They were actually parapsychologists. And there is another movie called The Entity. It's from the late 80s or early 90s, where this lady was being haunted by an entity that went along with her, and they actually did an experiment and they were able to track this entity. So this is what parapsychologists do. Most of them are actually college educated, and some of them even hold doctorates. But parapsychology itself is kind of the bastard black sheep child of the scientific world, and it is very looked down upon in the realm of academia. However, if we switch that gauge and looked at channeling from a medical standpoint, maybe even like a neurological standpoint, Maya Bialik, looking at you here, and what if we put all the probes or whatever onto a channeler while they were channeling and see what parts of the brain are firing off? It is, you know, if I'm nothing else, I am a nerd before anything else. But also with my studies of natural medicine and healing, there is this part of the body called the parasympathetic nervous system. That is the part of the body where you can watch a video of somebody like falling or hurting themselves and like you kind of feel it too, or those point of view videos where somebody is on a roller coaster and they're reaching the top of the drop, and that you get the sinking feeling in your stomach even though you're not on the ride. That is actually the parasympathetic nervous system at work. So it would stand to reason from a scientific standpoint that channelers are really just people that have a more sensitive parasympathetic nervous system and can at will access parts of their brain beyond the 8 to 10% that average people can access. This, by technicality, would classify channelers as a superior species of human or whatever. So This led me down a tunnel, branched off of this rabbit hole. And I got to thinking, because I very much believe in Jesus. I grew up in church. But when I got into my occult studies deeper, and especially with learning Kabbalah and reading the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, not Hermes Trismegistus, it is said that Thoth founded the mystery schools in Egypt. Okay, now, back in ancient Egypt, pharaohs, if they had more than one son obviously was the heir apparent. If he had multiple sons, the other sons were either sent off to be high-ranking officers in the military, and the other one was sent off to the mystery schools to learn sorcery. You can actually even see this at work in the Disney movie, of all places, The Prince of Egypt, okay? So it wasn't uncommon to have sorcerers, but these sorcerers learned this information and this sorcery from somewhere. However, when you look at it outside of a spiritual standpoint and still come from a place of kind of logic and science, not only was Moses sent to this mystery school, but if you really think about it, it's more than likely that Jesus was too, because in the Bible, Jesus was born and then he seems to not be in there again until he is in his 30s, which it is about the same amount of time that it would actually take for you to master the alchemy that is taught in these mystery schools. So, Jesus himself said that you would do greater things than me. Jesus turned water into wine. Jesus made the blind man see. Jesus rose Lazarus from the dead, and Moses parted the Red Sea. To the untrained eye, like, let's say we go back in time to before fire, to a caveman, this looks like magic. Or, you know, even later after that, that I don't have to do all of these things and I can just push this button and there is fire. So, Jesus himself said, you shall do greater things than me. So if Jesus was actually able to do all of those things, he was trying to actually get people away from religion and harness and tap into their own inner divinity. Now, when you look at things like turning water into wine, parting the Red Sea, raising people from the dead, and making the blind see, this is actually psionic activity, okay? Telekinesis. Some of us have seen the movie Carrie. That is not magic. That is actually extreme mastery of energy, which we all know and can scientifically prove has a physical, measurable effect on the world around us. Parting the Red Sea, that's telekinesis. Raising someone from the dead, that is a different kind of psionic activity. Do you know that the U.S. military trained scions? We train scions. There is a movie, George Clooney stars in it. It is called The Men Who Stared at Goats. The U.S. military was trying to make psionic soldiers, right, that could use telekinesis and all of these things, and they actually succeeded. And it's called The Men Who Stared at Goats because the idea was they, you know, the military, of course, they tested on animals. They would bring in goats and have these men stare at these goats and focus their energy to make the goat's heart stop. So, and they did. So if you can stop a heart, you can restart a heart using the same psionic power. So it's really not magic so much as it is science. It takes access to different parts of the brain to be able to do things like that, to have psychic powers, or the different clairs, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience. This is not something that comes from outside of us. It's very, very possible that we are just able to fire off different parts of our brain beyond that 8 to 10% that other people cannot. So that brought me to something different. I am a channeler. So when I say a channeler, I mean a person that has visions, right? A psychic, a person that can move things with telekinetic powers, or even like if you think of Shaolin monks that can do these things that seemingly defy the laws of physics. Superhuman. So if it's super, it would stand to reason that it is a whole separate species. But it gets a little bit deeper. So there's another branch off of that. So there is this lady on TikTok that I follow. I absolutely love her. Her name is Tarot on Dex, D-E-X. If you don't, you should. She's great. She made a video and she said maybe they put Jesus on the cross and show him to you so that they can show you their first successful mark, and drop the fucking mic. And a lot of people didn't get it, but I 100% got it. Who killed Jesus? The actual church killed Jesus. And what Jesus was doing is he was teaching people, you know, their full power so that they can do greater things than he. So if you really think about it, that makes a whole lot of sense, because when you look at the crucifix, it's an effigy, right? It is a cross with dead Jesus hanging on it. Why is it that Christianity is the only religion that does that? Like any other statue of any other deity, they don't have them immortalized in their worst possible moment of their life, in their death. And I thought about it. I was like, you know who else did shit like that? Vlad the Impaler. He would take his victims, and this is the actual human that the story of Count Dracula is based on. If you haven't read it or researched it, it is quite interesting. But what he would do is people that were invading his kingdom, he would not only kill them, but impale them, right, on these huge stakes, and he would have them placed around the borders of his kingdom in a very blatant show of fuck around and find out, because I wish a motherfucker would. So maybe, just maybe, the church has Jesus up there hanging dead on a cross in very Vlad the Impaler fashion, because Jesus was a channeler, a master channeler that was trying to teach other people how to do it. Now understand, not every channeler is a witch. And with as watered down and commercialized as spirituality is, not every witch is a channeler. But how is it that a person like myself uses tarot cards? But like I said, I grew up in church. They had prophets and prophetess and evangelists in church that could prophesy and see the future. See, when it's done within the confines of the church, it is sanctified. But that's because the churches can control those channelers. See, think about it. Spiritualists and channelers and witches and brujas and priests and priestesses, with the rise of the church, became very much demonized, right? And maligned and ostracized and counted out. And for a time lived on the fringes of society. Hell, for quite a bit of time in history, we killed people for even being suspected of such heresy. In my time walking hand in hand with the Great Mother, and even for those of other spiritual disciplines outside of the church, we know very well that us chosen folk, our mission is to actually help the collective ascend, right? But how can we do that if most of society kind of turns their back on us? And that keeps us separated from the very people that we are actually trying to help and release from that bondage. Like I said, the evangelists, those people can be controlled by the church, but us witches, we cannot, because we don't have those limiting dogmatic beliefs that teach people that God is something that is outside of yourself. We don't do that. So the church can control those prophets and turn people away from us heretics. Now, despite race, being Asian, black, white, purple, Latinx, or even African, a lot of people can come together despite the color of their skin and agree that we are bad people or we are of the devil. Seems to me like that different form of oppression was intended to keep us away from each other, the very, like I said, the very people that we need to help, so that those that are in control can stay in control. There is a conspiracy theory going around that the world is actually run by 7 witches, right? These are the people that shadow governments turn to kind of etherically control the population. That actually does not seem too far-fetched, given the fact that not only the U.S. military, but even the Germans and other militaries around the world have actually dabbled into this parapsychological realm and trying to use etheric warfare for soldiers, right? So given that information, the fact that the world is run by a coven of 7 witches really doesn't seem too far-fetched, whether it's proven or not. Throughout history, every man or woman in power had a Jafar, right? From Aladdin, a vizier, a sorcerer, a seer, a prophet, or some spiritual person around them. Why should that have changed? But with that being said, when you think about energy, right? And you think about high vibrating people versus people that are what we would call still sleep, there's only so much that us as spirit workers and those that are trying to ascend can do when we are outnumbered. Think about basic math, right? When you are dealing with integers on the number line, positive and negative integers. When you add a positive plus a negative integer, when you're trying to add a positive and a negative integer, what do you have to do? You have to subtract and take the bigger number, right? So if, let's say, the 7 witches that help shadow governments run the world are assisting in keeping everyone asleep and detached, they're able to do that because they have used their magic to spread that out to everyone else, to get everyone else to do their job for them. However, if we all opened our minds to things that were different than the things that we have been taught, especially when it comes to the limiting dogmatic belief of Christianity and other limiting religious beliefs like that, maybe if we all opened our minds and learned from other people, that would help us to ascend. I guess the best word for it would be a witch. My aunt is a Messianic Jew who, despite all of the things in the Bible, was very, very, very against my spiritual path. However, one of the most beautiful things about my aunt is she is a very intelligent and reasonable woman, and we can converse on things that we disagree on and listen to each other to learn instead of to undermine and rebut. And so now, like, we have an understanding and we can have these very esoteric conversations and things like that. Now, is she going to pick up a deck of tarot cards? No, but she is much more accepting to the path that I walk through, us conversing and learning each other and not alienating ourselves from one another. This in turn raised my frequency because now I'm happy because my aunt is one of my favorite people in the world, and this in turn raises her frequency. So much so to the point to whereas if anybody says anything about her niece, she will put that right in line because nobody messes with auntie's baby. But that was my thought this morning, that maybe channelers are a superior species. And if I believe that it is known because there's another lady that I follow on TikTok. Her name is Madame Oshun. She found that the FBI actually has an entire file on the Ifa religion. It is an ATR, an African traditional religion. Like, they have it all broken down. So why is it that the FBI and the CIA are interested in these things? Because it's not like there's some big, huge Jeffrey Dahmer-esque case where you have a serial killer running around ritualistically killing people, at least not now. I know that there was the satanic panic of the 80s, but they are still very actively researching these things. Intelligence agencies all across the world, maybe they know something that they don't want everyone else to know. I am not surprised that this thought came back up because a few years ago, I had one of my work dreams. I call it a work dream because it's not that I'm sleeping and resting so much as I am jumping in and out of portals and timelines all night. It can be a little exhausting. I still wake up quite tired. I had I guess you would call a vision of something like this very thing happening, not necessarily in this timeline or the near future, but it's definitely something to think about. So there's my little map down the rabbit hole for you today, and hopefully you gain something from it, or hopefully it made you see something from maybe a different lens or what have you. But you know me, I'm always here to drop jewels and provoke thoughts. So until next time, my babies, you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Love you.